Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm so glad that we're here to learn together. We have about 85 minutes to try to go through all the halachos of preparing for Pesach in terms of koshering your home. For Pesach, getting rid of all your chametz, making sure that your kitchen is ready and your pots and pans and ingredients are ready. So we're going to go through it as we have in the past. From the basics and then spreading out so that everything is covered. Again, if you have any questions as we're going through, please post it to the chat so that we can share it together. Because we're on Zoom this year, I'll be able to share a couple of products that I recommend in terms of koshering. So I'll be able to share those screenshots, and if you need any links, I'm happy to put those in the chat as well. So as we know, the mitzvos of Pesach are very close to the hearts of the Jewish people. We take them very, very seriously, and that's part of the burden, part of the richness of the Jewish halachic culture. And it really is an uplifting time preparing for Pesach, but can be overwhelming as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to recommend best practices, how to make your preparation for Pesach smooth and clean and clear so that everything is prepared as it needs to be, ready for Pesach with the, I would say, the path of least resistance while taking note and careful attention to all the intricacies of the halacha. Okay, so here we go. So the most basic rule of koshering is that the understanding that when you use a kli, if you use a utensil to cook something that was not kosher, the tam, the residue of that food which is not kosher is absorbed into the walls, into the material of that utensil. And in order to make it kosher, for anything, for Pesach, for milk and meat, whatever it is, you have to remove that tam. You have to remove that absorbed taste, that residue. And after you remove it, the kli becomes kosher, and you can use it for whatever it is. This applies for Pesach. It applies the whole year, but the rules are slightly different for Pesach, and we'll note them as we go through. So once we know that you have to remove the taste, so the next layer that we have to know is that the way that a taste, the time is absorbed into a kli, into a utensil, is always going to be through either heat and or liquid. So if something is, let's say you have a non-kosher piece of bread, which is chametz, and you put it on a plate, and you leave it on that plate does not become chametz, because there's neither liquid nor heat. But the most where you have heat and liquid is obviously going to be in the kitchen, and therefore when we get started, we're going to start with the kitchen. So how do you remove the tam? How do you remove that residue that's absorbed into the kli? So the rule is kibolo kach polto. It needs to be removed in the way that it was absorbed. So if it was absorbed through heat, direct flame, it needs to be removed through a direct heat. If it was absorbed through liquid, it needs to be removed through liquid. So we're going to start, those are the two ways to remove tam, to remove the taste, the residue which is absorbed into the material of the utensil. So we said the first one was heat, fire. That's called libun. Libun means burning. So this applies to things that have food on it directly without a liquid. So for example, if you have a baking sheet and you baked cookies on your baking sheet, so then the taste of the cookies, the residue, a little bit is absorbed into the baking sheet, and now that's a chametz baking sheet. In order to remove it, since it was a direct contact without any liquid in between, you need to remove it with heat. The way to do that is libun gamor. Libun gamor means you heat it up so hot that any residue that's absorbed will incinerate. That is generally assumed to be about 900 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very, very hot. and that's the heat, the temperature of a self-cleaning cycle. When you put something through a self-cleaning cycle, it incinerates the oils and other residues that are in and on the utensil, and therefore it makes it, whatever it was before, it comes out kosher. That's called libun gomer. Now there's a derivative of libun gomer, which is called libun kal. So the highest form is incineration at like 900 degrees self-cleaning. The derivative of that is called libun kal, which is the lighter form of burning, which means that it doesn't itself incinerate those tastes, as you would see, but it's hot. It's so hot that if a piece of paper touched this utensil at this temperature, the piece of paper would ignite. And that's about 500 degrees plus. And we rely on that because we said that the way you remove the taste is the same way that it went in. Now, you don't bake your cookies at 900 degrees, because if you baked your cookies at 900 degrees, they would be incinerated. That's what happens at 900 degrees. You bake your cookies at 350, 400, 450, whatever temperature it is. So if you raise the temperature over that, so then you can rely on that. We'll talk about which scenarios and cases, that also remove the taste. Now, these are two forms, A and B, of libun, of burning out the residue from the utensil. And that would be used for a utensil where the utensil was used directly with chametz. The best case is the best example is a baking sheet that you could put cookies on. Another example is a frying pan. So let's say you make French toast. The French toast goes directly on the pan. Now, even though you put a little bit of oil in the pan, the oil is so little that it's not going to change the halacha in this case, and therefore you would have to burn out the baking pan, which we'll talk about later on. Okay, so those are just the fundamentals of libun. That's direct heat. The other type of koshering is through a liquid. Now, often the way we cook is not direct heat. We do it through a liquid, like you boil noodles, you put matzah balls into your chicken soup. So there's a liquid in between the chametz, which is the non-kosher food in our case, and the pot itself. So in those cases, you would remove the taste using hagala, using boiling. And the way you do that is different. The way you do that is that you clean the pot entirely. Okay, so you made your soup. It's now a chametz pot. You clean it entirely with soap and a sponge and hot water, and then you wait 24 hours. Before you do this type of koshering, you need to wait 24 hours. That's the fallow period. So A, clean. B, wait 24 hours. And then C, you dip the whole pot, whatever the pot is, into another pot of boiling water. I mean, the water actually is on the fire, rolling boil. You take it, you dip it in, you leave it in for a couple of seconds, and then you remove it and run it under cold water. If it can't all fit at once, so you can put it in and then rotate it slowly so that the whole thing is in the boiling water for a couple of seconds, and then run it under cold water at the end. And that's called hagala, and that's used for the type of utensils, pots and the like, where the heat was through a liquid. That is the second type of koshering. Now there's a derivative of that type of koshering also, so this is 2b, which is called iroi. Iroi means pouring from a pot of boiling water. So you take your kettle and you pour it over the thing that you're trying to kosher. Now that's not going to work for your chicken soup pot that you put matzah balls in, because that's not how it became chametz. It didn't become chametz through pouring it. It became chametz through actually sitting on the fire with the matzah balls inside. So, and we know that you can only remove the taste using the way that it went in. So that would be for something like, let's say you have a bowl, let's say a plastic bowl, and you took your matzah ball soup and you put it into the plastic bowl. So now your bowl is a chametz bowl because it had matzah ball soup in it. But since it went from the pot into the bowl wasn't sitting on the fire, it was only poured into the bowl. So therefore, your bowl is only a chametz bowl through pouring, and therefore it could be removed using this type of pouring koshering called Eroi pouring. So that's 2B. And last thing that you have to keep in mind is that they are stacked, meaning there's a more stringent one, a more effective one, and a less effective one. The most effective is the Liban Gummer, which is the firing it to 900 degrees, the self-clean. The least effective is pouring out of a kettle directly onto it. And the middle ones of either putting in the oven at 550 for an hour, or putting into a pot of boiling water, those are the same. Those are both for things where you used it with a liquid, or in a case where you can't fire it up. I want to pause here for a second to take any questions, because this is the key to everything we do in koshering. So if you want to unmute yourself, or you want to raise your hand, or you want to type a question, now's the time. We'll take 30 seconds, and you can ask if you'd like. Yes, Sharon.
Oh, so my question is, are there materials that these items are made of that are precluded from any of these particular things?
Great question, Sharon. So the answer is yes. And we're going to mention those later. We'll go into greater detail, but the ones which are excluded, there's really one that's excluded and one derivative. The one that's excluded is clay, like china, earthenware it's called in the Chumash, because it's porous and the taste is absorbed so deeply that it never gets removed. It never gets removed effectively. So you can't kosher china, you can't kosher porcelain, you can't kosher anything with tile if that would be something that you had. And the derivative of that is glass. Ashkenazim do not kosher glass. Some Sephardim also don't kosher glass for Pesach. So glass, which is most common in pot lids, cannot be koshered for Pesach. So no matter, even if you would do one of the other forms of koshering, that's not going to be good enough. But anything else, metal, wood, things like that, those would be okay. Great. Any other questions? Yes, Martha.
Yes. So you're saying that there's a degree of effective,
Yes, there are 3 levels.
But they're all, if you pursue any one of those appropriately, at the end, you have something that's kosher or Pesach.
It depends how it became not kosher for Pesach.
But
You said that
yeah, but if you applied all the rules you explained correctly, right?
I'll say it again. I'm not sure if I understand your question, but I'll say it again. You need to use a form of koshering that is as least as powerful as the way that it became not kosher. So if it became not kosher with a baking sheet, you put your cookies on the baking sheet, so you can't just pour boiling water on that because that's not going to be good enough. You can't dip it in boiling water either. That's not good enough. That would need to go through a self-cleaning cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, my question was, assuming that you follow all those rules correctly, then even though there's a more,
you don't have to go so far. You only have to use what's appropriate for your type of utensil.
And it's kosher once you do that.
And it's kosher. And we're going to go through all the specifics as we go through. Great. Any other questions on this? Any other questions on our fundamentals? Question was asked, put china in a self-cleaning cycle in the oven. China cannot be kosher in a self-cleaning oven. I think the china would probably break anyway, but aside from that, you can't put china in a self-cleaning oven. Yes. Any other questions? Jeffrey, I see your hand up.
What about a wooden table that the kids eat on?
We'll talk about tables later. Okay, we're going to go back. We're going to keep going. Any other questions, just put them in the chat, and I will try to get to them as we go through. Great. So we spoke about the different ways to kosher. So now let's start in our kitchen. Now, the most problematic place for kashrus on Pesach is going to be your oven and your stove, because that's where you prepare your food with the heat. So we're going to start with ovens, then go to stovetops. How do you kosher your oven? Now, ovens are actually the easiest thing to kosher if you have a self-cleaning oven, because your self-cleaning oven is really the only thing that you can get to 900 degrees. So, since that you can turn your oven up to 900 degrees. So we said that's the most effective form of koshering. So it's very simple. You just take your oven, you turn it out to a 900 degrees to a self-clean cycle. It takes about an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, something like that. And then your oven is kosher for Pesach. Now you don't really even need to clean it out so well, because the self-cleaning oven, the whole point is that it burns out everything that's in the self-cleaning oven. So all you do, you want to kosher for Pesach, you just go over to your oven, turn it on, make sure it's on for a cycle, and then it's good. Now you still have to clean around the edges because the edges don't get hot enough, so you just want to make sure you clean that really well. But the oven itself is koshered. Everything inside the oven is now koshered as well. So if you have your racks inside the oven, those are koshered. If you put in any types of utensils that can withstand that heat, like a cast iron pan, that will now be koshered for Pesach. And since it's the strongest type of koshering, it makes everything kosher for Pesach as long as it's kosherable. Now, we all know that many people are concerned about their racks going through a self-cleaning cycle, that it's going to damage their racks. So if you are concerned about how to kosher your racks and you don't want to put them into a self-cleaning oven, hold on and we'll find another way. But we know that anything that goes through a self-cleaning cycle will be kosher for Pesach. Let's say you don't have a self-cleaning oven. So what are you going to do then? So the first thing so now we have to treat it with the other ones. Now all the other types of koshering, either putting it on 550, dipping it in water, or pouring water on it, all have the same rules. A, clean it well. B, wait 24 hours. C, do the koshering process. So first thing is, clean your oven well. Now cleaning your oven well means using a caustic cleaner. The caustic cleaner is important because it removes any residue. So you can use Ajax, you can use Easy Off, you can use whatever else people like to use. And those are all fine. And it'll remove it. But also what it does is it's game. It makes any absorbed tastes that are in there unusable. They don't taste like what they were before. And therefore, it makes it easier to kosher. So A, in an oven, you take your Easy Off or your Ajax or something like that, and you really have to scrub the oven very, very well. Now, how well do you need to scrub your oven? So I know that you can't get all these stains off the metal of the oven. It just doesn't work. So you need to scrub your oven so well that the metal is smooth. So if there's a stain, but it's absorbed and it's smooth, that means there's no mamashes, there's no external residue, and then you can move on to the next step. If there's still a raised stain, that means that has to be scrubbed off. So A, scrub your oven clean. B, wait 24 hours. And then C, do the koshering cycle, which by an oven that's not self-clean, is you turn it on to its highest setting, usually 550, for an hour and a half. And that will raise the temperature, definitely higher than anything you baked in there. And also so high that the metal gets so hot that if paper would touch it, it would ignite. You leave it on like that for an hour and a half. And now your oven is kosher for Pesach. A great time to do this year it doesn't make such a big difference, but a great time to do this is after Shabbos. If you clean your oven before Shabbos, so then you can wait your 24-hour period over Shabbos when you're not using your oven anyway, and then just kosher it after Shabbos. If you ended up cleaning it after that, so then you still have to wait your 24-hour period, and then it's going to take out a day from your baking cycle. But that's okay. This year it's fine. Pesach is not till after the next Shabbos, and you have plenty of time. So that's how you clean your two types of ovens. Self-clean the easiest. You don't have to wait. You don't really have to clean it out even. You just turn it on, let it burn everything up, and that's fine. If it's not self-cleaning, so you have to A, clean it, B, wait 24 hours, and then C, turn on to its highest setting, 550, for an hour and a half. This applies also to if you have a broiling drawer, so you do it the same way. You clean it, you let it wait 24 hours, and then you turn on to its highest broil for an hour and a half, and that will kosher that oven. Any questions on ovens before we get to stovetops? Okay, great. So let's go to stovetops. How do you kosher your stovetop? So there are different parts of the stovetop. Some of them need to be kosher, some of them don't need to be kosher. Let's start with the parts that don't need to be kosher. So the stove top, the metal that runs below the burners, does not need to be kosher for Pesach because you have no food interaction with that part of the oven, with that part of the stove. Your pot doesn't rest on it. If anything falls there, you don't eat it. So that part, the truth is, if you leave it not kosher, is not an issue. It doesn't need to be covered. It doesn't need to be koshered. It needs to be cleaned. You don't want to see like noodles around there, right? That'd be horrible. But you don't have to kosher it. That's the metal below the grates. The grates themselves do need to be koshered for Pesach because you're putting your pot directly on it. And in order to kosher your grates, you have 3 options, okay? The bravest and easiest option is to take those grates and put them into the self-cleaning cycle. You don't have to clean them, you just take them, put them in, they come out, and they're ready for Pesach. That's the bravest and easiest. But we all know that people are concerned that they're going to get damaged. So what are the other options? So the other options are as follows. Number 1, you have to clean it. Okay, so you clean your grates very well. In your sink, you scrub them with whatever scrubber you use, get off anything that may be stuck on them. Then you can put it into your oven at the lower temperature, not 900, at 550 for an hour and a half. And that's good enough for these grates because the truth is that the food doesn't go directly on the grate, right? It goes on the pot that's resting on the grate. So for a grate, that's good enough. You take it, clean it, put it in the oven at 550 for an hour and a half, and that's fine. The third option, which is the one that I personally do, is to have the fire from your stovetop kosher the grates by sitting in the fire itself. So what that means is many stoves have various sized burners. So you choose your largest burner and you take your grate, the one that you're focusing on, that you're going to kosher, you clean it, and then you put it on the largest burner and you turn the fire up to its highest setting for, let's say, 20, 25 minutes. And then you take a pot with a little bit, you put some water in it just to keep the heat in on the burner. So you put a pot with some water on it, and that will heat up the burner at least as hot as it's ever been with chametz, and that koshers that burner. If you have since you have multiple burners and multiple grates on your oven, you need to do this with each of the grates, and you have to make sure that it's above the largest of the flames. So if you have multiple different various sized flames, so you should just rotate through the grates, clean it, put it on the flame, highest setting, put a pot with a little bit of water in it, like an inch or two, whatever, just that it will boil the water, but it will keep the heat in and really heat up the grate, and then that grate is kosher for Pesach. That's the grates. So underneath the grates, you don't have to clean at all. The grates themselves, either put them in the oven self-clean, or clean them, put them in the oven at 550 for an hour and a half, or clean them and put them under a pot for about 25 minutes on its highest flame. And how clean does your grate have to be? It's as clean as you get it. And that's going to be good enough. As clean as you can get your grate is good enough for that. What about the exposed metal of the top of your stove? Like if you have a strip between the burners that's not covered by the grates, so that can be koshered in one of 2 ways. That can be koshered if you want. First, you clean it, wait 24 hours, and then you can pour boiling water on it because that's how it probably would have become not kosher if anything fell on it from something else. Or you can just put a strip of aluminum foil over it and just keep it covered, and just make sure that you don't cover the vents with that aluminum foil. And that's also just fine. If you have a ceramic top stove, so then that ceramic cannot be kosher because that's what we said, it's the same as clay. and that can't be kosher. So you just cover it as best. You clean it and cover it, and that's fine for this. That's stoves and standard stove tops. We're going to also talk about glass tops, but let's pause here for any questions on ovens and stoves. Jeffrey, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. If you're going to kosher the grapes by putting them in the oven on 550, would you do that before you kosher your oven for Pesach or after, or it doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The grates are not going to transfer anything either way to the oven. So either way is fine. Any other questions?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, two questions. I assume throughout, whenever you say take a pot, it doesn't matter if it's kosher or Pesach, that pot.
Great question. So let's talk about that. We're going to talk about that by the other types of koshering. What type of pot are you supposed to use for koshering for Pesach? So you're koshering your non-kosher pots, right? Your chametz pots for Pesach. So what type of big pot are you supposed to use? So the rule is that you need to have, it should not have been used in 24 hours. It doesn't really matter if it's a milchik pot, a fleishik pot, a Pesach pot, a chametz pot, as long as it has been used for 24 hours, that's fine. However, the practice is, the minhag is to use a Pesach pot. So if you have a Pesach pot available, better to use that. If you don't have a Pesach pot available, that's also fine, but it's important that the pot has not been used for 24 hours.
So my second question was, what do you mean by the strip? You said describe the strip that needs special treatment. Where is that on the stovetop?
So our stovetop is 4 burners, 2 on the right, 2 on the left, and the middle part has no burners and no grates. It's just the aluminum. So that's the part that I'm talking about, because you might have food that falls there, you might put your pot down there, something like that. So either that has to be koshered or it needs to be covered. Yeah, Sharon.
So here's a question. When you're doing Hagala and you're putting things in the pot, you don't have to separate the milchig utensils from the fleishig when you put them in the pot to kosher them?
We didn't discuss that yet. We will get to how to kosher utensils inside boiling water. I would recommend separating them, because otherwise you're going to end up with a mixture of milchig and fleishig. You can get very confused.
When you go to shul and take stuff for them to kosher in shul, they don't ask you, is this milchig or fleishig?
So we'll discuss that. We'll get to it. And Sharon, if I forget, you'll remind me when we get to how to kosher pots. We'll get to that. Okay. Any other questions on stovetops before we get to glass top stoves? Okay, glass top stoves, which are so popular in the South in Florida, cannot be koshered because, like we said, glass can't be koshered. So what do you do with your glass top stove? Right, you're going to be putting your pots on right directly on. So what's the correct practice? So the correct practice is the way I recommend it, and different rabbis recommend a little bit differently. But here's what I think is the most effective and simplest way of koshering. What you do is, first, you clean it. You clean it fully, and you wait 24 hours on your stovetop. Okay? And then, after you clean it and wait 24 hours, you turn your burners up as high as they go. So each burner goes as high as it goes, regardless of the size, and it will glow red. Now that red glow is not the glass. It's the coil underneath. The issue is the glass really still needs to be koshered. And like we said, glass can't be koshered. And you can't cover your glass top stove with aluminum foil because I'm told that it will shatter the glass. So don't do that. So what do you do instead? So instead what you do is you want your Pesach pots to not be sitting on a chametz glass. So what you do is you want to elevate your pot. And the best way to do that, and here I'm going to share a screen. Here's a product that I found that I think is good. This is on Amazon. So this is called a heat diffuser. It's made for whatever. It's made like when you want to cook something, you don't want it to burn. Either way, it transfers the heat from the element to the pot. You see this one is made for an electric stove. They come in 2 sizes. They come in 5.5 inches and 9 inches, whatever it is. The point is that you take that metal circle, the handle is removable, and you put that on the heating element. You want to make sure it's not larger than the heating element itself, and that will elevate your pot so that your pot is not touching the top of your stove. So what you do is, again, you turn on, you wait 24, you clean it, wait 24 hours. Turn your elements on to their highest so that they get red. And then on Pesach, you want to use these diffusers to elevate the pot. There are other things you might want to use instead, but the point is that you need to use something that will not break your stove and will elevate the pot so the pot does not sit on the glass top stove. And again, this is cool. I can send anybody the link if they want. You know what? I'll even put it directly into the chat right now, so that anybody who wants is welcome to order it. Unfortunately, I don't get any kickbacks from Amazon, unfortunately. Okay, that's the link. I just put it in. And if you need it later, just let me know. That's the link for the heat diffuser that I recommend. And there are others that are also available. That finishes stoves. Stove, we did ovens, self-clean and not self-clean, stove tops. We spoke about ceramic and aluminum. We spoke about flames, gas stoves, and electric stoves. Next, we're going to talk about sinks and counters. Beforehand, anybody have a question about stoves?
What
Yes.
about
Yeah.
warming drawers?
Okay. Warming drawers cannot be koshered because they don't get hot enough. So just don't use it. I forgot to mention the covers of the covers of the flames. I don't know what they're called. But those metal discs that cover the flame itself, those do not need to be koshered. They should just be cleaned and then put back on.
So one more question. If you have a broiling drawer,
A
but you
broiling drawer can be kosher because it gets.
if you've never used it, do you have to kosher it?
If you never used it, you need to kosher it. I don't know if it's part of the oven, what the heat transfer is between the two. So I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Usually the rule of thumb is if you never used it, you're not going to start using it now. It's like,
Yeah,
when,
no, absolutely. Right.
it's like when you're going through your stuff, should I throw it out? I never used it, but like I might start using it now. In general, if you haven't used it yet, you're not going to start right away. Any other questions before we go on to sinks and counters? Okay, so let's talk about sinks. Sinks are also a very sensitive spot for kashrus. Just getting back to the question. When you want to heat up the grates, so I said you put it over the largest flame, turn the flame on high, and then put a pot on it to keep the heat in with a little bit of water. The water is just that the pot doesn't burn. I think the question was, I lost the question. Was the question? So you should heat it up for about 20-25 minutes on high, just with some water just to keep the heat in. How much water is up to you. You just want to make sure that it's very hot and that your pot doesn't burn. Let's talk about sinks. So we said sinks have a lot of issues because they have hot water. And so you have heat and liquid. That's going to be a big issue. So you have your chametz dishes, you clean them with hot water, you put your noodles in there. Big issues. How are you going to kosher your sinks? So sinks we kosher in the same way that they became not kosher, I mean the same way they became chametz. The way that they became chametz was by pouring hot liquids on them, right? You didn't cook in your sink, there's no flame in your sink. So the way you kosher it is also by pouring hot liquid directly onto the sink. So we're going to go through the exact same koshering process as before. So this first step is always clean well. You got to clean it well. So you want to scrub your sink. You want to use a cleaner like Ajax is a little bit caustic that has bleach in there, something like that, that will counteract any taste that's absorbed in. You clean it with a sponge. If you're brave, you can use Brillo to really get any residue that's on the sink, especially like in the cracks by the drain and wherever it is. We all know where that gunk is. So then you scrub it down. That's A. And then B is always you wait 24 hours. So that means you're not using your sink for 24 hours. We'll get an asterisk. I'll get back to that. You don't use your sink for 24 hours, and then you need to, since it became not kosher through pouring boiling water, you need to kosher it using boiling water. The best way that I find to kosher a sink with boiling water is to boil a kettle, because it has a narrow spout and it's covered, it boils quickly. Boil your kettle and then pour that boiling water all over the sink. Now, when I say all over the sink, I mean actually the water needs to go directly from the kettle to all the different spots. It's not enough just to pour in one spot and let it spread, because then it's not direct. You need to take your kettle and pour it over the edges of the sink, right, around the edge, around the walls, and then over the whole bottom. You're going to run out of water after one kettle. It usually takes about 2, 3, or 4 kettles, depending on how effective and efficient you are and how large your kettle is. Another tip when you're koshering with boiling water is to wear long sleeves. Sometimes you think it's going to get so hot in the kitchen, you want to wear short sleeves. Big mistake. You want to wear long sleeves when you kosher, because you don't want the steam to touch your arms directly. You want them to be covered. So you pour that boiling water all over the sink, and then you run cold water over the sink, and the sink is now kosher for Pesach. You want to do the same thing over the faucet. So again, you scrub that faucet to make sure that there's no residue from anything during the year. Wait 24 hours. You don't use it for anything for 24 hours, again with an asterisk. And then when you take your boiling water, you pour it directly over the faucet. And now your sink is kosher for Pesach. Now, my mother likes to point out, it's a great observation. We live in apartments, and you have one sink. If you're lucky, you have 2 sinks. Nobody in an apartment has a parv sink, right? The only time that you have a parv sink the entire year is right after you kosher for Pesach, because the same way it became kosher for Pesach, it also became parv. So now, all of a sudden, you have a parv sink in your house. So my mother says, after you kosher your sink, that's when you should do all your parv cooking first, because you can put your parv dishes, whatever they are, directly into the sink, and you don't have any issues with there being inflation and things like that. So you now have a kosher parv Pesach sink, and you should use it in that way. Now, I said that you have to leave it fallow for 24 hours, which you do, but that was with an asterisk. What are you allowed to use it for anything? So the answer is yes. You're allowed to use it for cold water that's not chametz. So let's say you want to wash your hands in the morning. You want to wash negavasser, you can wash your hands in the sink because it's cold water and it's not chametz. You cannot use it for either chametz or hot water during that 24-hour period. So if you have any chametz dishes, they need to be washed in the bathroom. You have any not chametz dishes that need to be washed in hot water, has to be in the bathroom. If you want to wash a Pesach dish with cold water during that 24-hour period, that's okay. It's easiest just to do everything in the bathroom for 24 hours, and that will make your sink kosher for Pesach. I see there were a couple of questions. Just unmute yourself and go for it.
What about the drain? Do you need to put a strainer in the drain to kosher it?
You're asking if you need to kosher the strainer?
Well, there's also the drain out of the sink. Does that portion be koshered? Or can you put a strainer in, close it so that it's filling, as you're pouring, it fills the bottom?
No, so you should, no. Plugging your sink so that it fills with water is not going to help because it's not on the fire. You're not heating it in the sink. The strainer itself should really be replaced for Pesach because it can't really be koshered. Or you could just take it out. They're available on Amazon. Still have 2 weeks, so you'll have 12 days to get it before Pesach. Any other questions?
Again, it doesn't matter whether the pot you use is kosher or Pesach, or the
Correct.
practice
The
is.
pot that we're using to pour, it needs to have not been used within 24 hours. It doesn't matter if it's milchik or fleishik. The practice is to use a Pesach pot, but it doesn't need to be a Pesach pot.
Weird, but how do you get the underside of the faucet?
Good question. So the OU, great question. The OU actually recommends taking off the aerator, which is that bottom part. I've never seen that done, but that is what they recommend. I mean, just removing it and like not using it on Pesach. I think the assumption is that when you pour the water over the top, it will kosher anything that's stuck there, that any residue that's there. So you don't. If you want to remove the aerator, that's great. If not, so you just pour enough water, it will get all over.
Okay.
You don't need to kosher the handle of your sink. It's enough to just clean it really well. Somebody asked about the handles of the stove. You certainly do not need to kosher the handles of the stove, but they do need to be cleaned really well because, like, when you turn on the fire, you have like chametz on your hands. You're going to get residue on the knobs, and then your knobs have these crumbs that you can transfer on Pesach. So you don't want that. Just make sure when you're cleaning up that you clean the knobs really well. The knobs of your stove, the knob of the handle of your sink, the handles of your refrigerator. These should be really clean so that you don't have any chametz on your hand that could transfer on Pesach. Now, until now, we spoke about stainless steel sinks because stainless steel can be koshered. As we mentioned, enamel cannot be koshered. So what do you do if you have an enamel sink? So you need to do something that's a little complicated, but if you have an enamel sink, you've done it before, and that's just the burden that you shoulder for having an enamel sink. What you need to do to kosher an enamel sink is as follows. You do the same thing. A, you clean it. B, you wait 24 hours. C, you pour boiling water on it, but you don't pour boiling water just once. You have to pour boiling water 3 times, which is outside the purview of our discussion. Why? But you pour boiling water on your enamel sink 3 times. And then, even after you've done all that, you still need to use a sink insert. So if you have an enamel sink, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's an insert, it's a basin that goes into the sink, has a drain at the bottom, and you use that over Pesach. Some very interesting stories. Somebody once asked me if they need to kosher their stainless steel sink three times by pouring water 3 times. I said no. They said, but my parents koshered their stainless steel sink by pouring water 3 times. I said they don't have to. Like, there's no need. They said, but that's what they do. I said, did your parents have a stainless steel or enamel sink? So the parents had an enamel sink. Therefore, the parents have been koshering 3 times because that's what they saw growing up. And that's what the grandchildren have been doing also. But it's not necessary. An enamel sink needs clean, wait 24 hours, pour boiling water 3 times, and then use an insert. A stainless steel sink, it does not need that. You clean it, wait 24 hours, and then pour boiling water all over it. Good. Let's talk about counters. If there are any questions on sinks, we'll get back to the questions at the end. Counters are very similar to sinks because, again, there's no direct heat. There's no flame. They're not heating up the counter. The way it would become not kosher, the same way that you're pouring something. You spill some oatmeal or you put down your French toast or something like that. Your matzo balls fall out onto your counter. Now your counter is a chametz counter. What should you do with your chametz counters? Now, one option is just cover with aluminum foil. It doesn't take such a long time. It's very simple. You just take heavy-duty aluminum foil, clean it well, put down 2 layers of heavy-duty aluminum foil, tape it down. Your counters are good to go. You didn't damage any of your cabinets. You don't have to worry about anything. I've done it multiple times. Very simple, very effective. That's one option. What if you want to kosher your countertops? So which countertops can be koshered? So they need to either be stone or plastic, like Formica, or they need to be stainless steel. If you have any other type of countertop, like you have a tile countertop, so that can't be koshered because that's ceramic. But if it's either granite, Formica, or steel, and quartz is the same as granite, you can kosher it. How do you kosher it? So you have to kosher the same way you kosher your sink, which is much more complicated because your counter doesn't have a drain built in. So you have to clean it very well. You scrub it with a sponge and Ajax, maybe get everything clean, especially if you have any cracks in your counter, you have to really clean those very, very well. Just tonight, I was going through the crack in our counter where we have this gunk that's stuck. That has to be koshered, that has to be cleaned very, very well. That's A. And then B, you wait 24 hours. You don't use it for anything hot or any chametz for 24 hours. And then C, you need to pour boiling water all over your countertop, and it's as bad as it sounds. Because like we said, you have to get that boiling water on every single spot, right? There's boiling water all over the place, all over the floor, all over the counters, and it is what it is. So if you want to do that, just be very careful. You should have a lot of towels all on your hanging over your cabinets on the floor to absorb all that extra water. Some people like to use a kumkum, which is an electric kettle that as long as it's boiling, the water actually has to have a rolling boil right before you pour it on, and that works. Question was asked about can you cover it with plastic? Yes, you can cover it with plastic as well. Just like you can cover aluminum foil, you can cover it with plastic. Yes, Alan, I see your hand. Yes. Just unmute, Alan. Alan, we can't hear you because you're muted.
On a stone countertop, not so much water, but just enough water and an iron that you would use for a steaming iron that you would use to press pajamas.
I mean, like a clothing iron. Well, I don't press my pajamas. I wear them as is. Like, nobody has ever told me that my pajamas were frumpled.
Clothing iron and not so much water, but just enough water to get slick.
It came up last year, the question of could you steam your countertop, remember?
Right, so this is okay. So we will talk about steamers. I'm about to get to that. You're talking about something a little bit different, Alan, and I have an answer for you. But let's talk offline because it's a little bit dangerous, and I don't want the liability of sharing it with everybody.
Okay.
If anybody else is interested in that conversation, please let me know, and I will follow up. In terms of,
why would you not cover the counters if you could? Why would you boil and kosher them if you could cover them?
you know what, Sharon, we don't ask kashas. That's what they want to do.
Okay.
It's who are we to judge?
No, but I'm asking you, it sounds like you're doing it.
I have done it, and it's a huge mess.
In the drawers too.
Because it gets all over the cabinets, and it's a huge mess all over the floor. It's not the easiest thing. Okay, what about using a steamer? So these questions come up recently. I will share with you a steamer. Now I've discussed this with multiple poskim, and what they said is, I don't know that I would recommend it. I don't know that I would do it. Theoretically, it is okay to use hot steam. Hot steam means that it's 212 degrees. Or around that heat, and it heats up the whole counter with direct steam. So a little steamer is not going to do it. It's not going to get, the steam's not going to get hot enough. The counter's not going to get hot enough. You're not going to have enough steam. It just doesn't work. As I was discussing it with somebody, this was the one that I came up with. It's a heavy duty steamer. It's available on Amazon. Not anymore. It was available last year. It's around $150. It has a lot of steam. It gets very hot. I showed it to somebody. I said, is this good enough? He said, I can't say for sure. I don't know. Theoretically, you can kosher your counters with steam. It's very clean. It's very neat. But there are halachic concerns. Does it really get that hot? Is there really enough steam? We just don't know. We don't have the empirical knowledge. Like, we haven't had people studying and checking how hot these things really get. They claim, here you see it, they claim it gets up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is hot enough to kosher, but it's hard to know. So if you're going to clean with steam, I would just say, and I'm not advocating for this, just make sure your steamer gets really hot and has a lot of steam, and is good enough for that. I'm happy to share the link for this as well for those who want. Okay, so that's countertops. Any questions on countertops and the like? You want to go back to ovens? You're welcome to go back to ovens also.
I have a sink question.
Yes,
You
sink.
mentioned that
Yes,
the-
thank you.
You mentioned that the handles of the sink don't need koshering, but the spout does?
Yes, the spout does, because you have hot water coming out of that spout, and you could pour the water. Let's say you have You have noodles, or you're putting hot water directly on, or oatmeal, something like that. So then your spout, the tip of the spout, actually becomes chametz, so therefore you need to kasher that. Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Sinks, counters, ovens, stoves. Okay, so those were the complicated ones, because I will throw microwaves in there for a second. The other things are less complicated. So let's talk about microwaves. Now, the microwave itself is the same thing. It heats up the food. Let's say you're making oatmeal or pancakes, and then there's the steam and the splatter that gets all over the place. So you need to do the same thing. A, clean everything, scrub it down to make sure there's no residue. Wait 24 hours. B, and then you need to kosher it. Now, you can't kosher with boiling water, but you can kosher it with steam. The way you do that is you take a microwave-safe bowl or cup, fill up with water, put it in the microwave for 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes till there's boiling and you have the steam all over the place. It fills the whole thing with steam. The walls will get really, really hot, and then it is kosher Pesach. However, the turnstile, is that what it's called? Turntable, is made out of glass, and that you can't kosher. So that needs to be removed and replaced. Now, what we do in our microwave is we dropped the turntable years ago on the floor and it shattered. You just take a regular microwave-safe plate and put it on top, and it rotates just fine. Not an issue. So you can just do that. You take it out after you kosher it and just replace it with something else. Replace it with a different plate. People have asked if you can cover it with saran wrap, like a double covering of saran wrap. I guess that's okay. I've never heard an issue, but I think the better option halachically is probably to remove it and just to replace it with a different glass plate that works just as well. So those are all the things that need to be koshered. Let's talk about dishwashers. So some people kosher dishwashers for Pesach, some people don't kosher dishwashers for Pesach. The issue with koshering dishwashers for Pesach is manyfold. There are many possible issues why you should not kosher it. Mostly because aside from the part of the dishwasher that you see, the water in the dishwasher is recycled. So it washes the dishes, and then it uses that same water it goes through the pump and through the heaters and through everything. So the water going through all those tubes has pieces of chametz going through it. So not only the racks, not only the casing that you see, but all the tubes in the background also are chametz tubes. So you have to kosher all that. And the issue is, does the water really get hot enough to kosher those tubes? It's not going to get it. The water in your dishwasher doesn't go up to 200 degrees. So maybe it doesn't get hot enough. Also, there's probably like gunk. You have to clean it first. Like, can you really get the gunk out from those tubes? It's questionable. So I don't recommend koshering your dishwasher for Pesach. If you haven't done it before, I don't recommend starting. If your practice is to kosher your dishwasher, so then what's the way to do it? So if you're going to do it, what you should do is you should, A, clean it out very well. Now, cleaning out very well means running a hot cycle with nothing in it but detergent to clean out the pumps and the tubes and everything else, making sure the entire casing and the racks and everything is completely clean. That's A. B, waiting 24 hours. And then C, running it on a hot cycle with detergent. Some people say 3 times to kosher it. And some people say even if you're going to do that, you should still replace the racks because you can't really clean the racks well. If you do all that and you've kosher dishwashers in the past for Pesach, so then that's okay. This is not the same as koshering dishwashers, or let's say you put in like milk and meat at the same time issue. That's not a major issue. We're much more strict. The halacha is much more strict for Pesach. So even if you say, well, I've koshered my dishwasher in the past when I put in a milk bowl with cheese on it, that's true. Completely different type of halacha. Koshering for Pesach is much more stringent, and I don't recommend starting now to start koshering your dishwasher. Great. Any questions? Okay. Those, I think that basically covers everything that we can. Yes.
David here. Just a safety issue. I don't know the science of it, but when you heat a bowl of water in the microwave, the water gets superheated, and it doesn't form the necessary bubbles the way water boils. Evidently, there's nothing if the glass is too smooth for the bubbles to form on it. So it's recommended, like you put a chopstick or something in the bowl, because if you handle the bowl after you've run that water for 7-8 minutes, it can explode on your hand, especially if your bowl is narrow at the top.
That's a very important point. If anybody needs chopsticks,
try throwing a couple of pieces of gravel or some sand into it, and that'll work. 'Cause then there'll be no.
So just make sure that it's not too smooth when you put it in, so that it boils properly. Okay, great. Any other questions? Yes.
I just want to be clear about one thing with the dishwasher. I understand you don't recommend it because you're not sure that the gunk will get out.
That's one of the issues, yes.
But you don't have an issue with the plastic racks, even if you have a stainless steel inside, not a porcelain inside, but your racks are plastic. That is not a problem?
So, right, the general practice, unless your practice is different, the general practice is that we can that plastic can be koshered for Pesach. Like I mentioned, you can kosher Formica countertop. Formica is a plastic. The general practice is that we do kosher plastic for Pesach. So I'm not concerned about the plastic on the racks. I'm more concerned about the dishwasher itself.
Understood.
Okay, so let's talk about your fridge. Now, the fridge is the first thing that does not need to be koshered. You don't need to be kosher because you're not cooking in your fridge. There's no heat. There's no heat. So what do you have to do? You just have to make sure that there's no chametz in your fridge. Now, during the year, you have tons of chametz in the fridge, and there's crumbs all over the place. It's a big job. There's no question. It's a big job to clean the fridge. So what you do is, we know how to do this. You take out your products. You take a sponge with soap, with Ajax, with Fantastic, whatever it is, and you scrub every single surface in the fridge. The walls, the shelves, the sockets where the shelves connect to the walls, the vents, the rubber part around the door. And there's so much chametz in you know what I'm talking about, right? You got to really scrub the whole thing because you don't want one of those pieces of chametz, one of those crumbs, to fall into your Pesach brisket, and then that would be horrible. It would be the worst. So you want to make sure that everything is clean. You want to make sure that you're using a soap to clean it, so that make sure everything really gets off. And you do the same thing with your freezer. Clean it out, scrub everything down. Some people also line the shelves. You can do that if you want. You don't want to, if that's not your practice, you don't need to add it. But you should make sure that everything is clean. I'll just note that you have to be careful not to put any hot pots directly into your fridge over Pesach. Like, some people, like, you have your chicken soup, it's done, and you just put it directly into the fridge. So people know that's not so good for the fridge anyway. Okay. But you shouldn't do it because you have to be concerned that there's some taste transferring from the shelf, which is more of an issue on Pesach than during the year. So that's fridges. The same thing applies to tables. Your table, whatever it's made out of, it could be wood, it could be plastic, it could be metal. You do the same thing. You scrub it well, make sure that there's no chametz on the table, and then your table, since you're going to be using it with hot food and chametz and liquid, all those things, should be covered with plastic. I think the best option is just take a plastic tablecloth and cover it directly on the table, and that stays on the table the entire Pesach. And then you put another tablecloth on top, and that's the one that you eat on. And that way your table is good to go no matter what you're doing over Pesach. That is basically all the halachos of koshering that I wanted to talk about for tonight. So any questions on koshering before we get, sorry, no, let's talk about pots and pans first, okay? Because we left out the most important part. Let's say we want to kosher pots, pans, forks, knives, things like that. How do you kosher that? So that we kosher in boiling water, like we said. So what you do is you take a big pot. Martha, we know, preferably a Pesach pot, but very importantly, it needs to be clean and not used within 24 hours. You take it, you fill it up with water, you put it on your stove, you turn it on high, you cover it, and it starts to boil. It takes about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it is, until you have this rolling boil. And then you take your other utensil that you're koshering. Now, what can be koshered? Let's first start with what can't be koshered. You cannot kosher a baking sheet because it's not used with liquid. It's used directly with the chametz, and therefore it can't be koshered in boiling water. You cannot kosher a frying pan because it's not used with enough water. There's more direct contact between pancakes and French toast and anything else that has flour in it directly in a frying pan. That can't be koshered in boiling water. What can you kosher? So you have a soup pot, you have forks and knives and spoons and all those things. You take them, you have a boiling pot of water, you take your pot and you dip it in. If it's a one-piece pot, meaning the handle is actually part of the pot, the handle also needs to be koshered because it's all part of the pot. So you stick it in, leave it in for a couple of seconds, take it out, grab it with an oven mitt so you don't burn your fingers, and dip in the handle for a couple of seconds, and then run it under cold water. And now your pot is kosher Pesach. I should have mentioned, of course, you A, cleaned it, B, waited 24 hours, and then C, did that koshering. Same thing is true for utensils, forks, knives, and spoons. You do A, clean them really, really, really well. They have to really be scrubbed if you're koshering forks, knives, and spoons. They have to really be scrubbed exceptionally well because there's so many locations, so many crevices where chametz can get stuck. Scrub it really, really well. Wait 24 hours, and then boil the water and drop them in one at a time. As you drop them in, because they're cold, they're going to drop the temperature of the water. Once the water stops boiling, you need to stop, cover it up, let it boil again, and then keep going. And then by the end, you have all your utensils sitting at the bottom of your boiling water. You pour that out into the sink, and then you run cold water over all your utensils, and your utensils are now kosher for Pesach. Here is a tip. Now, there's a lot of koshering that uses boiling water, right? Like you might want to kosher your sink with boiling water. So what you can do is you can kosher all of your utensils, and then use that water to kosher your sink, because it's boiling water, right? So you already cleaned your sink, you waited 24 hours, and now you take this water, you pour it all over the bottom of the sink, and the sides of the sink you'll kosher using a kettle. And that's just fine. A super pro tip is you want to kosher your grates. So you take your grate, you clean it, you put it on your fire, turn the fire on high. We said you put a pot of water on it, right? So you take your pot of water, leave it on it's going to take a long time till it boils, till it really gets hot. And then you leave it on and you put in whatever you're koshering, and then you pour that water into the sink. You ended up koshering, what did you kosher already? Koshered your grate, you koshered your forks, and then you koshered your sink, all with the same water, all of the same pot, all of the same fire. It saves time and it saves energy, which is really important. You want to really save your energy so that you can focus on learning Divrei Torah for the Seder and all those other things that you need to do. One last note about koshering pots is that if it's two parts, so you don't need to kosher the handle, you only have to kosher the pot itself, but if there are rivets connecting the pot to the handle, so rivets have like a space behind them where chametz can get stuck, and the water's not going to get there to clean it out. So what you need to do is you need to heat up the rivet. So if you have a pot with rivets, which most pots have, or many pots have, what you do is you kosher it in the regular way like we described, but you also take a flame from you light like a candle with a big flame, or a candle lighter, or a cigarette lighter, something like that, and you hold up the pot, and then you hold the flame underneath the rivet for like 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and 10 seconds is fine, probably fine, good enough. And that will heat up the rivet and it will burn out anything that's stuck behind it. I was asked if you need to run cold water. So you've noticed I've always said you run under cold water. Yes, after you kosher with liquid, you need to run it under cold water afterwards. That's the last stage of koshering. It's the last part of C. A is cleaning, B is waiting 24 hours, C is cleaning is putting in boiling water, and the end of C is after you dip in the water, then you run under cold water. You have to run under cold water. That's the last step of the koshering process. Okay, now we're open for questions. We have time for questions, and then afterwards we'll discuss products.
Yeah,
Yes?
so it seems like there's a process here that the first thing you should do is kosher your stove and maybe oven, because you can't use a Pesach pot to kosher your sink if you haven't, in order to heat up the water in your Pesach pot to kosher your sink, your grates have to be kosher Pesach, right? So isn't there sort of you don't put a Pesach pot on top of a non-Pesach grate.
So if your grate is clean, good question. If your grate is clean and you're just koshering it, it's okay to use your Pesach pot for that. So you have a clean grate that you want to burn out, so that's fine. Clean it, put it on the fire, and put a Pesach pot in it, that's fine. No problem. Yes.
Rabbi, is there an issue with silver that's cleaned but still tarnished? Should it be?
Tarnish is not an issue.
Okay.
The issue with silver is that, especially if it's ornate, is there's so many crevices.
Yeah.
If you can get it really, really clean, great. If you can't, so then it's not worth koshering it for Pesach because you can't get it clean enough. And it's not, there's always a concern that there might be chametz or some sort of residue in there. I'll just note while you ask that question that if you're koshering in shul, that's great. You can sign for an appointment. But because of COVID, we really need to restrict the appointment times and the wait times and all that. So we are not koshering silverware in shul. So like we explained, it's not so hard to do at home, right? You just boil a pot of water and drop it in one at a time. But we won't be able to do it in shul because it's too time consuming and it's going to come out of other people's pots and pans.
So could you, if you're doing it yourself, could you drop it in with a net, like a lingerie bag, like a thin net? Because how do you drop it in and then fish it out?
You don't have to fish it out. The trick is that you drop it in and you leave it there.
And then let it cook.
Then you pour it into the sink.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, you don't need to use a net. Okay. You can use a basket if you want. That's what we use in shul, but it's not necessary. Yes.
And you drop in one at a time, and can you leave them on the bottom till you got everything taken care of?
Correct. You need to drop them one at a time for two reasons. One is because they need to be fully exposed to the water. And two, if you drop it in all at once, the water temperature is going to drop all of a sudden, and it's not going to be koshered at all. So you have to drop them in one at a time to make sure that the water temperature stays high. Any other questions about silverware, anything, sinks, microwaves, fridges, anything?
If you're using a non-Pesach pot, do you have to boil the water first and then discard it, or that's not necessary?
If you're using a chametz pot to do koshering, which we said is okay, even though it's not the minhag is to not do that, but it's fine. So we have to make sure that it's clean, that it hasn't been used within 24 hours. That water that you boil cannot be used on Pesach, but if you want to use it, let's say for tea, I guess that would be fine. Is that what your question was?
No, I'm saying if you're using it for hagala, you're using it for koshering, do you have to boil a pot of water, discard it, then boil another part, and then do your koshering?
Oh no, you don't have to kosher that pot for Pesach because it's not a Pesach pot. It's fine. As long as it has not been used within 24 hours, you can use it for koshering. So you just boil it up and then use that one the first time.
So Rabbi, one more thing,
Yes.
Going back to the milchik fleshik story, supposing I
yes.
of each serving spoons that I want to kosher.
Right. So
Okay.
that's fine. Technically speaking, once you kosher something, it comes out parv. So it doesn't really matter if you do it all at once or separately, right? We said you could use a fleshik pot, a milchik pot, as long as it hasn't been used within 24 hours. The reason I don't recommend doing it all at once is because you're going to have all your silverware stuck in the bottom of the pot. You're going to take it out. You're not going to remember which one's which. So I just don't recommend doing it in that way. But technically speaking, it's okay.
But you don't have to know which is which because they're all par.
Yeah, we say that, but then you want to put it back in the set, and you're not going to remember which set it's in, and it's going to end up in the wrong drawer. It's just going to cause trouble down the line.
Okay.
That's what I would say. Maybe you, Sharon, I know you have to design. You recognize which set it's from. It's not going to get mixed up. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you do it, it's not an issue.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Just for a point of information, I don't
Yes.
want to kosher my dishwasher, but you said it has to do because it doesn't get very hot. But if there's a sanitized cycle, which I've never used, wouldn't that make it very hot?
So good. Even the sanitized cycle does not go up to 200 degrees. The sanitized cycle, I understand, goes up to about 160 degrees, which is not like you wouldn't be able to kosher your pots in 160 degrees. It's not hot enough. So therefore, we don't rely on it lechatchila for dishwashers either. But again, if your practice is to use it is to kosher dishwashers, then you should do it in that way. But you should do it in the way that we described to make sure that you have everything, all the different issues are covered as best as they can be.
I don't plan to. I just thought sanitize, and I've never used it anyway. I just thought that might make it hot enough.
Right. So people suggest that, but I would say like this: if you are going to kosher your dishwasher and you have a sanitized function, so then you should use that while you're sanitizing. But I wouldn't recommend it otherwise. I mentioned that there are cracks in your countertop or between your sink and your countertop, all things like that. So you can't kosher in a crack, just like you can't kosher something if there's residue stuck in your forks or spoons, then you can't kosher it. So there are two important applications. Number one is knives. Some people don't kosher knives at all. I think the general practice is to allow koshering knives, even if the handle is not the same material as the blade, but only if there's no crack between the blade and the handle. So if you have silver, often the handle of the silver knife is weighted and it's a separate piece. If there's a crack, a crevice between them, that can't be kosher because there's residue stuck in there, and it won't get clean. It won't be properly koshered. The same thing's true if you have like a knife set, and you have there's a crack between the handle and the blade, that also can't be koshered. Or if you have a crack in your countertop, even if you pour boiling water on it, the crack will not be koshered, and you still need to cover it. You can cover it with tape. You should scrub it down and cover it, and that will make sure that even though it's not koshered, you don't have any issues coming up over Pesach. Any more questions?
When you
Okay.
say crack,
Yes.
you also mean seam, correct? Like
What
where
you
one
call
counter,
seam, I call a crack because it
Yeah.
starts as a seam and then ends up being a crack.
right, but it like where the back of a counter meets the countertop, there is a seam between the two.
So if the seam is what I guess we'd say seamless, if they're really perfectly flush that nothing can get stuck in there, so then it's not an issue.
Okay.
But if they're not perfectly flush, so then it is an issue. Yes, I see you have your hand up.
Yes. Hi, Rabbi. Thank
Hello,
you so much.
Sally.
First of all, thank you so much for this. It's Sally,
My
Dorfson.
pleasure.
With regards to blechts, do we need an extra blech or?
Great
Yeah.
question. So when you say blech, tell me what you're describing.
The plata.
Okay. So we're a plata meaning an electric hot plate. That's just a plate. It's like a rectangle that gets very hot. So that can't be koshered because it would need to be self-cleaned, which obviously it can't do. So what you do is, I'll tell you the the halachic answer, and then we'll have to discuss the practical answer. The halachic answer is what you do is you clean it, you wait 24 hours, and then you cover it with aluminum foil, preferably a double layer of aluminum foil. Now, the issue is that it's been reported, I think SOMET actually did research on this, that it's a fire hazard. You shouldn't do something that's a fire hazard. Now, other people say like they've done it for years and years and years, and there's never been an issue. I can't tell you what's exactly safe. I can tell you halachically it should be covered. Certainly you don't have to cover the vents, you don't have to cover the sides, things like that. But if it's covered, so that would be good enough. A blech itself, which is actually the metal sheet that goes over the flames, that does not have to be koshered. It just gets you just scrub it to make sure there's no chametz on it, and then cover it with 2 layers of aluminum foil, and then that's good enough. We didn't get the question about coffee. Let's say you have a Keurig. Can you kosher a Keurig? So the OU says that you can. Some Keurig flavors are certified kosher for Pesach. You have to make sure that you're using kosher for Pesach coffee. But what you do is you have to really clean it out well. So I think the part that holds the cup comes out. You have to scrub it. You have to use toothpicks and toothbrushes and everything to make sure you really get it clean. Wait 24 hours and then run it through with just a dry cycle, which is really wet, to make sure that it's kosher for Pesach. Yes, Alan?
You've said now a couple of times 2 layers of aluminum foil. Heavy-duty aluminum, 2 layers, really?
So we always recommend 2 layers for multiple reasons. One is practical, one is halacha. The practical one is if you have 1 layer and it rips, so then you're just exposed to the non-kosher surface below. You have 2 layers, and then you have a safety between. That's the practical reason. The halachic reason is that you need, if you have 2 layers, and even if, as long as there's no liquid between those layers, so it's like a sterile surface. Nothing can transfer in between 2 dry layers of foil. So if you have 2 layers, no matter what's underneath, let's say you have some cookie crumbs that got stuck or something like that, so then there's no issue in between. So we always recommend a double layer for everything on your counters, on whatever else you're covering. You don't have to use a double layer on your stove, like that middle middle area, because you're not putting anything there. But it's just that it's covered. But anything that you're actually going to be used, we recommend a double cover.
What about the adhesive plastic covers?
Say the question again.
They're plastic. They're adhesive, and self-adhesive plastic.
Yeah, so that you wouldn't need a double cover in that case, because since they adhere directly to the counter, so there's no issue that you're going to have something below it. So the double layer is actually, the counter counts as one of those layers. But where aluminum, where you could actually get something that's stuck underneath, it's better to have a double layer. I was asked if it's sufficient to just use like a cleanser, like bleach or Lysol, something like that, on the crevices, and therefore you don't have to worry about any chametz because you're making it inedible by using these cleansers. It might technically be good enough. It's not clear. I don't recommend that on its own. I think you can do that with koshering and things like that, but it's best to cover a crevice like with something like tape or something like that. It's very simple. You take a piece of painter's tape, put it over the crevice or the crack, and then everything else will be kosher, and that will be covered with the tape. Great. We have 5 more minutes. So if there are any questions, good. Otherwise, we'll go through a couple of other issues.
That's a really quick question about the Keurig.
Yes.
Okay, great. So would it be the same thing applicable to an espresso? And what if you're only using coffee pods that are kosher Pesach year round? Is there a need to kosher it?
So if you're using only kosher for Pesach coffee pods, so then you don't really have to kosher it. I think you still should, in the same way. but you don't really need to. Nespresso, I think that they have a list of what's kosher for Pesach. I never looked into it. I don't know the hashgacha that's on it. I personally have Nespresso and I like it. It would be the same. Yes, we need to talk about urns. I can't believe nobody mentioned urns, right? So what about your urn? So if your urn is only used for coffee, so then your urn is not really a chametz stick, but it does have to be scrubbed down because it's on your counter with other things. So you just scrub it down, and then it's fine to go. If you, on the other side, let's say you have one of those old-fashioned urns where the metal gets very hot and you heat things up on top of it that are chametz, so now you have a chametz urn. And then that can't be kosher at all. Can't use it on Pesach. Let's say you have a urn that you use for coffee, but you also use it for oatmeal and things like that. So then you need to kosher the urn, but you don't have to kosher the whole thing. You only have to kosher the spout. So what you do is you clean it, wait 24 hours, and then you pour boiling water over the spout. You run hot water through the spout, so you're koshering the inside, and then you pour boiling water over the spout, and then your urn is kosher for Pesach. Let's go to a couple of other just important points. Make sure to check your car if you're going to be in an office over Pesach. Why would anybody be in an office? Nobody goes to offices anymore. But if you go to your office on Chol Moed, you need to check your office also for chametz during b'dikas chametz. Quinoa requires special Pesach certification. Frozen vegetables require special Pesach certification because very often frozen vegetables are prepared using a solution that has chametz ingredients in it. Frozen fruit need certification, but they don't need specific Pesach certification. So you can get your, let's say your cut up mango, you can just buy it with an OU. It doesn't need an OUP. Cut up fruit and vegetables and the like, let's say, not talking about onions and garlic, things like that. But let's say watermelon or butternut squash, things like that. If you buy it before Pesach from a large supermarket that cuts bulk fruits and vegetables, that's okay. I don't think you can buy that on Pesach itself. Formula for babies. The OU has a list of which ones are acceptable. They're usually kitnios, which means that we treat it like almost like chametz. So therefore, it needs to be washed in the bathroom, but it's fine for kids. Pet food needs to be non-chametz because you're not allowed to feed your pets chametz on Pesach. If we have an issue with that, speak to me. Lactate milk needs to be bought before Pesach, but can be used on Pesach. Lactate pills are chametz and cannot be used on Pesach. Vitamins require Pesach certification. If you have a specific question about vitamins, please speak to me. Send me a clear picture of the entirety of the label, and I will do research as necessary to find out if it's okay for Pesach. Please don't do that on Erev Pesach because the research takes time. So just give some runtime on that. Questions about koshering your drinking glasses. For those who kosher drinking glasses, you can do that by soaking them in cold water 3 times for 24 hours. If that's what you like to do, you can do that. Maple syrup, as far as I know, requires Pesach certification. So that's that. Paper towels do not require Pesach certification. Cups, paper plates not require Pesach certification. Unprocessed nuts, with the exception of pecans, that have no additives. So they're not roasted, they don't have salt, they don't have anything, they're just unprocessed nuts, either whole or pieces or crushed, whatever it is, do not require certification, with the exception of pecans, which do. Unflavored seltzer does not need specific Pesach certification. Water does not need Pesach certification. Coffee, decaf coffee does require Pesach certification. Regular coffee does not, unflavored regular coffee does not need Pesach certification. Anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to mention two things. One is Trader Joe's, the OU catalog has always said Trader Joe's raw nuts are okay, and it's a very good price. It doesn't change Pesach time. But
Okay.
also, I think you mentioned that any kind of milk you can buy before
Yes.
Pesach without a P.
Any
right?
normal, any regular milk,
But
meaning,
once Pesach starts, it has to be OUP or something.
so regular milk can be bought even if it has A and D added. If it's regular milk is fine for Pesach. The minhag is not to buy milk on Pesach because A and D can sometimes be derived from chametz. It's very, very uncommon, but it is possible. But you can buy any Chol Yisrael milk or OUP milk on Pesach. And eggs. There's a minhag not to buy eggs on Pesach. That's great. I was actually looking at my shir from last year when I made this comment, and people said, it's okay, you can't buy eggs now anyway because there are no eggs in the stores. That was last year. But eggs can be, should be bought before Pesach if possible. Otherwise, it's fine to buy them on Pesach.
Rabbi Genack, I have a question about selling chametz. Is
Yes.
that, okay. Can you just explain exactly what we're selling? Like, for example, if you just closed up your dishes drawer, your
Yes.
dishes cabinet, and you didn't really check to see if there were crumbs in there or not.
That's fine. Any cabinet that you're selling, you
that?
don't need to check. You don't need to check that. So you have your dishes, your pots and pans, you tape it up, and that you don't have to check it, and it will be sold with the chametz. If there's any chametz in there, it will be sold.
I see, but so in other words, when you sell chametz, I thought you have to have in your mind exactly what you're selling.
So you should know generally, but the sale is specifically worded that if there's something that you don't know about, that it's also covered.
Are you selling mouthwash with alcohol in it? I mean, are you selling that stuff?
No. I mean, no.
Are you selling kitniyot?
No, you don't have to sell kitniyot. It means things with chametz in it. Now,
Chametz
you may have
gamor.
things with chametz that you don't realize. That's going to be covered. And you want to be as clear as possible. I just want to mention that there's a whole series of shiurim getting ready for Pesach. Rabbi Zurkin is giving a shiur about Pesach, Erev Pesach that falls on Shabbos. Rabbi Haggadah shiur. Rabbi Ari Berman is giving a shiur. So I just watch out for all those shiurim. It's all the same link. And I look forward to having a wonderful Pesach with you. If you have any follow-up questions, please email me, call me. If you're in the Halacha WhatsApp group, put it on the Halacha WhatsApp group. And I look forward to participating with you in the preparations for Pesach. Some people can't stand the preparation for Pesach. I find it exhilarating that we get to, as long as it's not overwhelming, that we get to follow all these detailed halachos and all the procedures to make sure that everything is perfect. I wish you a Chag Kosher v'Sameach. Thank you for learning with us. And again, any questions, we'll follow up later.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
You're
Rabbi.
very welcome. You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah, I find this exhilarating. It's just exhilarating. It's one of those.
Right? Isn't it exciting?
Rabbi Howie, a minute. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining
Good
us.
night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Right.
I thank you so much.
Good
So
night.
well-
You're welcome. Good night.
So
Chag
well
Kosher
done,
Sameach.
Rabbi Genack. So well done.
Such a pleasure to learn with you, Sharon. Chag Kosher Sameach.